what Nietzsche would sort of suggest, I'd imagine, is that Jung's Red Book, Jung's experience of going crazy, was actually a signal of Jung's his charge, his will to power, his energetic, animating power bursting out of him, but he failed to do it properly. Now, what you could look at with the Red Book is certainly an experience of madness. And what happens when you are full of charge, you're an electric, crazy, ambitious, animated madman. And what happens is that you become like an origin point. You become an original. You become a first creator. And you're going to offend all the ideologies of the past. You're going to offend the society around you. You're going to create something new, and it's going to be mind-blowingly weird, and people won't accept it. And then over 20 years later, people will be like, oh, what a genius. Nietzsche was certainly like that. Jung was certainly like that. And what you could look at the Red Book as is that Jung was receiving that experience of the dreaming mind, the animated charge, life force bursting through him, switching on all his cognitive facilities, his ambition, his passions, his dreaming mind. It all got switched on, turned up to 11, and it burst out of him. And it gave him the sacred artistic muse experience. That's what happened to Jung. Just like it happened to Nietzsche. Nietzsche was swallowed up by Zarathustra, and he wrote Zarathustra in 10 days. He flashed out Zarathustra, just ripped inside of him and gave him this sacred work. And Nietzsche would look at Zarathustra as something like very, very coherent, very, very well put together and readable and containing plenty of things, and sort of has a sort of orchestration and coherency to it. And the Red Book was the same situation with Jung. Jung was about to receive the sort of visual baptism of the fire of the Red Book, whatever that type of meant, and it was his opportunity to do this. And Jung was actually super inspired by Zarathustra at the time. But the problem with Jung is that Jung was in some sense unable to do precisely what he talked about. He was unable to humble his ego and embrace the sort of artistic role that he had. He was unable to embrace the creator. He was unable to put himself aside, his intellectualism aside, and actually integrate fully what he was trying to do. Jung in the Red Book had an opportunity perhaps to create something at the scale of Zarathustra, at the scale of William Blake, at the scale of Paradise Lost. He had this opportunity to create a great, profound work. He could have painted it out and made sort of some type of William Blake style comic book thing or something like this, or he could have edited it down. But actually what's interesting is that you see when you read the Red Book this sort of clashing of his blathering, intellectualizing, rationalist, nogginist mind, battering and clashing against the visual, mythopoetic, energetic part of himself, and he's unable to sort of fight between the two of them. The Red Book is actually a little bit unreadable because it smashes between, you could say, explosive visual coherency and then these big long pages of rationalization and explanation and expedition of what this stuff means. And it's Jung in some sense is making a mistake of not doing what an artist should do. Now he says himself that his goal was not necessarily to make this a work of art and all this type of stuff, but it doesn't really matter what his ego says he was trying to do or what he thought he should have done. His job perhaps was actually to give birth to an original creative point. He had this ability to have this big visual experience, and maybe he should have actually taken the time to embrace his true identity as a creative, as an artist, and represent these ideas fully for what they were. And instead, what you get in the Red Book is almost in some sense a draft of something that could have been, that never happened, because Jung either didn't embrace his charge because he had all this, you could say, guilt and intellectualization, and he had been imprisoned within the conceptual world of Kant and Cope and all this type of stuff, the ideological world of Cope that had actually hidden him back, held him back, and didn't allow him to release himself upon this job and actually become a full-on creative first principle and establish something quite profound. He was too stuck in his head to make it art, is basically what I'm saying. He was too stuck in his head to surrender and give into this charge, because he had all Christian guilt and Christian morality and philosophical guilt and psychological cope and intellectualism and nogginism. It actually it damaged his ability to do that job. And so even though he made it out for himself, he made it out coherent and all this type of stuff, he might have actually failed to achieve something that could have been necessary. And it's why maybe his impact is not quite as, you could say, resonant as Nietzsche's. Nietzsche's is kind of shocking in its profoundness and the perceptive and colorful depth of an awful lot of what Nietzsche talks about, whereas Jung went through the Red Book, and then his real contribution was the intellectualizations that came after that. And it's not taken seriously. Like, as much as we like Jung, most people don't take him seriously. I'm always getting, I talk to people who are, psychologists or scientists and all this, and they always basically dismiss me because I'm associated as a sort of Jungian. And they're like, no, Jung is just cope. It's just nonsense. It's just bullcrap, And really, that's because he went through the Red Book experience and he tried to articulate out of it, you could say, a load of scientific concepts. It was like he was trying to act, to be like, please accept me, science. Please, I'm trying to put this as a coherent and planned, ordered scientific thing to do. And all right, power to him. There's definitely something to it, but it's very floozy. It's very loose. It's he tried to systematize something that maybe wasn't ready. Like maybe we needed neuroscience of the hemispheres in order to make this stuff coherent. And now the only thing that Jung could be useful for is that you'll salvage out of Jung's ideas something new and all this type of stuff. The real thing that Jung needed to do, like maybe the thing that would have allowed Jung to penetrate through all that type of stuff, would be to fully embrace that role as like, I am an artist, I am a producer of art. This is precisely what his unconscious even said. This is art, my dear. This eruption of creativity that's coming out of you. And he might have been able to establish a great book like Paradise Lost, maybe a great work like Homer, this foundational fountain of creativity that would have provided it with us a sort of coherent myth to explore the future. But he failed to do that. And because he failed to do that, we have sort of lost. Whereas Zarathustra stands and Nietzsche's works stand as something that was just far more shocking. Nietzsche was just far more ignorant and far more stubborn and just sort of went for it. He went all in. And his work has a creative fertility to it that is very, very easy to grasp upon and very, very first principle and axiomatic and very, very creative in this type of way. And so maybe you could look at Jung's mistake as that type of thing. And the danger of Jung is that it leads towards you falling for the same problem. It leads towards you getting lost in intellectualization and symbol studying instead of symbol producing, instead of creative producing, instead of surrendering to the life charge and allowing that to fill you up, instead of you obsessing about how do I persuade and create a life charge within me so that it fills me up and occupies my dreams, and then fully give myself over to that so that I can produce something. And just sort of in a very simple sense, having faith that if I create these new visions, these new forms, these new ideas, the true artistic work, then all of this stuff will get sorted out by itself. There's no idea about creating an ideological religion or a coherent way to understand psychology. Just let the creativity happen, and a lot of this stuff will happen quite naturally in this type of way. Don't inhibit yourself. Let yourself go. Let the creativity out, and a lot of this stuff will work. But no, instead what we have is we have people stuck in the head. We have people stuck in our heads, stuck in our noggin still. And maybe Jung is this sort of problem with this. He's Kantian, he's Platonic in these type of ways. Jung, Plato, Christianity, modern psychology, it's all cool. Jung has lots of really cool ideas. I definitely, we don't want to dismiss them, but maybe it's still stuck in that paradigm of intellectualization, of nogginism, whereas Nietzsche's whole flip of the whole thing is that physiology is the reality. Where does the electrical charge come from? It comes from the body. The body must be persuaded, as he says. We must put ourselves through stress. We must traumatize ourselves. We must build up power. We must build up a nexus of force. We must evoke in our spirits or find within our spirits that will towards competition. We must fight and learn to fight each other, learn to attack each other, to create violent, conflicting energies inside of ourselves. We must create that energy foundationally. And once we have that competitive, explosive charge living within us, all that intellectualization stuff, it becomes a little bit irrelevant. You turn into a Spartan, you turn into a Roman, and you don't care about talk, you don't care about chatter, you don't care about orchestrating out elaborate conceptual left hemispheric schemes. You don't care about that type of stuff because that stuff's not creative art. It's not civilization building. It's not entertaining. It's not fun. It's just cope. It's all just cope. You don't want it anymore. We want to get that stuff out of the way. The thing that we need is charge. When there's charge, when there's energy, and when there's will to power, life force, animation inside of a people, the people are interesting. The people are moved. And even in an individual or a people, it's better. But now when it's all just like rationalizations and nonsense and nogginism, it's not fun, it's boring, it's frigid, it's stiff, it's dying, it's a signal of death in and of itself. Nietzsche went on to say that Plato and Socrates were the beginning signal of the Greeks' explosive energy dying, because they moved from being a people who were mythological, Homeric, energetic, fireball-like, to people who were neurotic, rationalizing, like Plato. Exactly what did Plato do? He studied the archetypes in Greek mythology and tried to come up with this idea of how do you create a new mythology and rationally put together a new mythology that will be able to organize society in a more noble and moral way. Plato was a rationalizer. Plato was an intellectual coper who came after the golden age and the fireball age of the Greeks. And precisely, if you want to create a golden age, you don't start with the rationalizations that happen at the end. You start with the energy and causes that happened at the start. This is what Nietzsche saw, that no one else seems to see. And so our situation, our problem, where we're like lost in the culture crisis and the meaning crisis and all that, is because we are weak physiologically, because we are weak in spirit, because we don't have a will to competition, because we're stuck in the marring conceptual world of cope. Like meme analysis says, you've got this big web of concepts and blather that are sucking your libido up into it, and you're getting trapped in all these memes and ideologies in the internet, instead of living a life in the body, living a energized life that is free and actually based on the experience and the charge of the body. And if you wanted to orchestrate out an ideology or a worldview or a way of doing things, you would return to this first principle, start on this first principle, understand this first principle, and then build everything upon that. And maybe Jung's stuff could come in and be integrated into that. I certainly believe that is possible. I don't think Jung is useless. I don't think Jung should be in any way dismissed. But I'm not sure if Jung is holistic enough. I think Jung actually fundamentally suffers from this, because the Jungians themselves have the specific trait of being neurotic, stuck in their heads, lost in an abstraction of symbols, lost, and they're not a creative first principle. They're usually up reorganizing, blathering about jargon, and they're not taken seriously. They're not good at being scientific. They're not good at being critical, and they're often sort of messianic in their worship of Jung's concepts, unable to establish their own concepts, and completely sort of low thumos, psychedelic addicted, weed smoking, low energy, low charge people, because they have no worldview where they're pressured to say, you need to build your energy up, you need to build your body up, you need to build your compelling power up, you need to build ambition up. They have no way of saying this type of stuff. The ideology as it's manifest is just not good. Now, it's not like the Nietzscheans can ever sometimes be better. You often get Nietzscheans that are like, there is no morality. I'm just going to, I'm going to set up a polyamory brothel here and all this type of stuff. That is my will to power. Like, that's obviously silly as well. But the Nietzscheans, I meet an awful lot more Nietzscheans who have their head on straight, who are more in the body, who are more instinctive, because I think it's because Nietzsche empowers ambition. I think Nietzsche suggests that it's okay to want to create stuff. It's okay to want to create a reality around yourself. He, in some sense, flatters and rewards the masculine instincts of wanting to build, wanting to be a first principle, wanting to be a creator. He does that better than Jung, and for that reason, he is more solid to build a foundation upon, because we want that creative spirit to flourish. We want the artist to be able to release their energy. We don't want the artist to be like Jung, where they get caught up reading the symbols that they're trying to interpret through and rationalizing what's going on. We don't really care what it means. We want to feel the energy of it as it's released. That's really the true thing that we're looking for. I don't want to be a part of a society that figures it all out. You don't want that. You might think you do, but you don't. There's no joy in that. That's death. That's when you're studying the movie after it has happened. You want to be experiencing the thing. You want the joy of it going on as it happens, this type of thing. And this is the sort of surrender that we're talking about. And so the axiomatic foundation that you could build a civilization upon, or build an individual upon, is actually about getting that charge in place. If that charge is not in place, if the person is not nakedly honoring their instincts and going about trying to create a reality for themselves, building a life around themselves, and listening to their instincts and actually trusting them and ambitiously trying to make them happen, there is no point in almost anything else. Everything else becomes irrelevant. Everything else becomes pointless, because it's just a low energy person who is grabbing onto maybe like a Jungian ideology that is just cope. It just turns into cope. It turns into a failure. It's not useful. It doesn't do anything. It just turns into actually a labyrinth of thoughts that don't go anywhere. It's a waste of time. It's nogginism. It's delusion. It's in the way.